The Battle of Sana'a was a battle during the 2011 Yemeni uprising between forces loyal to Yemeni leader Ali Abdullah Saleh and opposition tribal forces led by Sheikh Sadiq al-Ahmar for control of the Yemeni capital Sana'a and, on the part of the opposition, for the purpose of the downfall of President Saleh. Background: the 2011 Yemeni uprising followed the initial stages of the Tunisian Revolution and occurred simultaneously with the Egyptian Revolution and other mass protests in the Middle East in early 2011. In the early phase, protests in Yemen were initially against unemployment, economic conditions and corruption, and the poor economy of Yemen, as well as against the government's proposals to modify Yemen's constitution. The protesters' demands then escalated to calls for Yemeni President Ali Abdullah Saleh to resign. Mass defections from the military, as well as from Saleh's government, had effectively rendered much of the country outside of the government's control, and protesters vowed to defy its authority. On the 2nd of February, Saleh announced he would not run for re-election in 2013 and that he would not pass power to his son. On the 3rd of February, 20,000 people protested against the government in Sana'a, while others protested in Aden, a southern Yemeni seaport city. In a day of rage called for by Tarmax el-Carmen, while soldiers, armed members of the General People's Congress and many protesters held a pro-government rally in Sana'a. In a Friday of anger, on the 18th of February, tens of thousands of Yemenis took part in anti-government demonstrations in Taiz, Sana'a and Aden. On a Friday of no return, on the 11th of March, protesters called for Saleh's ousting in Sana'a, where 3 people were killed. More protests were held in other cities, including Al-Muchella, where 1 person was killed. On the 18th of March, protesters in Sana'a were fired upon, resulting in over 40 deaths and ultimately culminating in mass defections and resignations. On the 23rd of April, Saleh accepted a proposal to step down and shift control to his deputy after 30 days. The agreement included immunity for him and his family and further required the opposition to stop public protests and join a coalition with Saleh's ruling party. Reactions to Saleh's acceptance had been reserved, without the agreement formalized or accepted by both sides and with the possibility of the standoff continuing. After initially refusing to accept Saleh's conditions, the opposition decided to agree to the deal, and it was expected to go into effect by the 2nd of May. However, Saleh decided not to sign the deal, and the opposition has rejected a proposal under which top officials of his party would sign it as a proxy, leaving the deal in limbo. On the 22nd of May, after Saleh had agreed to the deal only to back away hours before the scheduled signing for the 3rd time, the Gulf Cooperation Council declared it was suspending its efforts to mediate in Yemen. Battle. First phase. A day after Saleh refused to sign the transition agreement, Sheikh Sadiq al-Ahmar, the head of the Hashi Tribal Federation, one of the most powerful tribes in the country, declared support for the opposition, and his armed supporters came into conflict with loyalist security forces in the capital Sana'a. Heavy street fighting ensued, which included artillery and mortar shelling. The militiamen had surrounded and blocked off several government buildings in the capital, and people on the ground were reporting that it looked like the situation was deteriorating into a civil war. During the 2nd day of fighting, loyalist forces heavily shelled with mortars al-Ahmar's compound, in which a number of his fighters were killed or wounded. This resulted in a counter-attack by the militiamen against the Interior Ministry building, which they hit with mortars, RPGs and machine gun fire. As evening fell on the 24th of May, the upper floors of the Interior Ministry headquarters were in flames. On day 3 of the fighting, military units that defected to the opposition were hit for the first time by mortar fire, killing 3 soldiers and wounding 10. By the evening, it was reported that tribesmen took control of the Interior Ministry building, Sabah State News Agency, and the National Airline building. On the 26th of May, heavy explosions rocked Sana'a in the south. This indicated the use of heavier weaponry than what was used in the previous days. 28 people were killed when shelling hit a residential area controlled by the tribesmen. The government claimed that the deaths were the result of a tribal weapons warehouse exploding, while a defected military official denied this, and the opposition stated that military forces shelled a building used by tribal fighters loyal to al-Ahmar and other major tribes who had joined him. During the night, the fighting spread to the Ahad district, about 20 miles northwest of Sana'a, where a brigade of Saleh's presidential guard clashed with local tribesmen. The earlier reports of the takeover of the Interior Ministry building were found to be untrue, since it was confirmed loyalists were still holding it and using it as their frontline base. Still, despite this, tribesmen had taken control of a total of 16 ministries and government institutions. On the 27th of May, tribesmen surrounded the camp of the Republican Guard in the Al-Fardanium area, 50 miles northeast of Sana'a, in an attempt to prevent him from joining the fighting in the capital. The tribesmen claimed that the advance on the base was in response to an earlier attack by loyalists on a village in the area. The militiamen broke into the camp and killed tens of troops, including the base commander, General Ali Nasser, and took over the base. After that, government military planes bombed the tribesmen. 2 loyalist helicopters then attempted to bring in reinforcements, landing 1.24 miles from the base. However, they were overrun and the tribesmen captured a number of soldiers as well as the 2 helicopters. A third helicopter, that was hovering above, was shot down by the militia. A military official stated that 7 jets were used against the tribesmen, and both him, and later a tribal leader, confirmed that a total of 2 military compounds had fallen to the opposition forces by the end of the day. 18 tribesmen were killed during the fighting for the 1st Army camp, while none died in the takeover of the 2nd. A ceasefire was announced late on the 27th of May by al-Ahmar, and the next day, a truce was established. However, by the 31st of May, the ceasefire had broken down and street fighting continued in Sana'a. Tribesmen had taken control of both the headquarters of the ruling General People's Congress and the main offices of the water utility. On the 1st of June, units of the Loyalist Presidential Guard, commanded by one of Saleh's sons, shelled the headquarters of an army brigade belonging to the defected 1st Armored Division. Even though the defected military units were holding a neutral position in the conflict between the loyalists and the tribesmen, the worst of the fighting was in the northern Hasaba neighborhood, where tribal fighters seized a number of government ministries and buildings. Government artillery fire heavily damaged the house of al-Ahmar, and the government cut the area's electricity and water supplies. The government units, led by one of Saleh's sons, and loyalist special forces attacked but failed to recapture the Hasaba administrative building. Tribal fighters also seized the office of the general prosecutor in the city's northwest. They were backed up by 2 armored vehicles from the 1st Armored Division. The Interior Ministry stated that the tribesmen had also captured a 5-story building in the pro-Saleh neighborhood. During the 24 hours since the breakdown of the ceasefire, 47 people were killed on both sides during the heavy street fighting, including 15 tribesmen and 14 soldiers. On the 2nd of June, more fighting left another 15 people dead, including a 7-year-old girl. Thousands of tribesmen from outside Sana'a attempted to enter the city to reinforce those fighting inside. They were stopped at a military checkpoint 9.3 miles north of the capital, but, as the day developed, they continued to make attempts to break through government lines into Sana'a. As the fighting was raging to the north of the city, tanks and armored vehicles were seen entering Sana'a from the south. Also, video of the street fighting in Sana'a surfaced for the first time. On the 3rd of June, an attack on the presidential palace left Saleh lightly injured and 7 other top government officials wounded. It is unclear whether it was a rocket attack or a bomb has been planted in the mosque of the palace. Saleh, the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, the Parliament Chief, the Governor of Sana'a and a presidential aide were wounded while they were praying at a mosque inside the palace compound. The cleric leading the service was also wounded. Saleh was injured in the neck and treated on the scene. 7 presidential guards were killed. Eyewitnesses, residents and government officials say tribesmen carried out the attack against the presidential palace, but the spokesman for Sadiq al-Ahmar denied it. The tribesmen were not behind these attacks on the presidential palace, and if they were, they would not deny it, according to spokesman Abdullah al-Qaisi. He said that the attack on the palace was pre-planned by President Saleh to make people forget about the attacks that he has committed over the last 2 weeks. He is the only one benefiting from the attack on the presidential palace. He wants people to feel he is oppressed and is defending himself and not attacking others. The next day, Saleh was taken to Saudi Arabia for treatment. According to U.S. government officials, Saleh suffered a collapsed lung and burns on about 40% of his body. A Saudi official said that Saleh has undergone 2 operations, one to remove the shrapnel and a neurosurgery on his neck. As Saleh flew to the Saudi capital of Riyadh for surgery on the 4th of June, a ceasefire was brokered by Saudi Arabia's King Abdullah. Reportedly, Saleh was already working out the details of a power transfer when he was wounded, making his return doubtful. However, an opposition party official told the Associated Press that international mediators, including the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, tried to get Saleh to sign a presidential decree passing permanent authority to his vice president before he left for treatment in Saudi Arabia, and the negotiations delayed his departure. He was expected to remain in Saudi Arabia for 2 weeks, one for treatment and another for meetings with Saudi officials. His absence also increased the possibility of an even more violent power struggle between the armed tribesmen who had joined the opposition and loyalist military forces under the command of Saleh's sons and nephews. On the 5th of June, protesters in Sana'a celebrated following the news of the president's departure. They chanted, "This is it. The regime has fallen." Sources told Al Jazeera that Vice President Abd al-Rabb Mansur al-Hadi had taken over as acting president and supreme commander of the armed forces. Despite the ceasefire, there were reports on the morning of the 5th of June of heavy gunfire and explosions in Sana'a, centered on Hazabah district, a focal point of fighting in recent weeks. On the same day, Al Arabia television said that acting President Abd Rabbu Mansur al-Hadi was due to meet members of the military and Saleh's sons. It was the first indication that Saleh's powerful sons had not also left the country. A ceasefire in Yemen's capital was at risk of unraveling on the 6th of June, as regime supporters opened fire on opposition fighters in renewed clashes that killed at least 6. The shooting took place in the Hazabah district. Residents of Sana'a said the capital was quiet on the 7th of June. The Youth for Change, who have said that Yemen was reborn when Saleh departed to Saudi Arabia, decided to stage a march of millions after they heard the regime's announcement that Saleh would return in the coming days. Second phase following the return of Saleh from Saudi Arabia. Clashes in the capital resumed in between 18 and the 25th of September. 162 opposition and security forces members were killed, with the military using artillery on opposition rallies. On the 19th of September, protesters, along with members of the renegade 1st Armored Division, attacked one of the smaller bases of the Republican Guards, located on the west side of the major Al-Zabari Road. They took control of it without firing a shot, and the loyalist forces retreated from the area. On the 24th of September, the loyalist military shelled the headquarters of the 1st Armored Division, leaving 11 soldiers dead and 112 wounded. On the night of the 25th of September, opposition tribesmen attacked the base camp of the 63rd Brigade in the Nehm district, 43.5 miles north of Sana'a. During the fighting, the commander of the brigade, General Abdullah al-Kulaybi, was killed. In all, 7 soldiers were killed. The tribesmen also claimed to had captured 30 soldiers after briefly capturing parts of the base. On the 27th of September, the defense minister escaped an assassination attempt when a suicide bomber attacked his convoy. On the morning of the 28th of September, opposition forces shot down a government warplane just north of the city. Eyewitnesses stated that the aircraft was bombarding a residential compound in the Ahab district when it was brought down. 2 people were killed in an airstrike in the district the previous night. Airstrikes had targeted the area since the 25th of September, when the base of the 63rd Brigade was raided. On the 15th of October, a new round of fighting started which lasted until the 17th of October. It started with government troops firing on protesters and killing 12. Another 6 protesters were killed the next day. On the 17th of October, 17 people, including 8 tribal fighters and 2 government soldiers, were killed. During this time, 10 defecting soldiers were also killed. By this point, 91 soldiers from the defected 1st Armored Division had been killed since Saleh's return to the country. On the 23rd of October, 12 people were killed in fighting between renegade and loyalist soldiers in the Hazabar district. More fighting on the 27th of October left another 17 people dead. Among the dead were civilians, tribal fighters and government soldiers. On the 30th of October, during the evening, the Air Force base in the capital was hit by mortar shells and 2 fighter jets were set on fire. Due to this, the civilian airport was shut down and the coming flights were diverted to the southern Aden airport. At the same time, 10 explosive devices planted inside 10 fighter jets at the military base were found and defused. On the 19th of November, opposition tribesmen once again attacked the camp of the 63rd Brigade, and this time it was an all-out assault. On the 20th of November, the military conducted airstrikes against the attackers while the opposition responded with anti-aircraft fire. By late on the 21st of November, the tribesmen had captured the camp along with 300 to 400 surrendering soldiers and a large cache of weapons. 12 tribal fighters were killed and more than 40 wounded in the fighting, most of them due to landmines around the base. 20 soldiers were also killed. Between 23 and the 25th of November, loyalist airstrikes and artillery fire pounded the rebel-held camp. An unnamed official claimed that up to 80 tribal fighters were killed.